Greg. We are ready for class tonight. We're resuming our study and actually coming right down to the close of our study. We have only one more session. That's this coming Sunday morning, and we will be wrapping up our study of the book of Exodus. And right now we're spending time in the tabernacle of the Old Testament. We've started off early 3 months ago, almost 3 months ago, looking at the captivity of the people of God down in Egypt. They were slaves. We saw Moses, the deliverer, raising them up, God raising up Moses, but Moses leading the people out, the big contest with Pharaoh, and then crossing the Red Sea and going to Mount Sinai, and now we're learning about the tabernacle as our last part of the study. 1 week from this coming Sunday morning, Greg, you and Brother Buckley will be teaching Leviticus and Deuteronomy, correct? No?
Leviticus and Numbers.
Okay, why do I keep saying Deuteronomy? Well, okay. Tell us what you're teaching, Greg.
Leviticus and Numbers.
Good. Whatever he said, that's what they're doing, okay? Leviticus and Numbers, that's just a week from this coming Sunday. New classes are just right on us. Old classes wrap up this week. Next Wednesday night is singing night. Everybody shows up for singing, right?
Amen.
Okay, yeah, good, thank you. Everybody shows up for singing, and then Sunday following that, the new classes will begin. I'll be in the back teaching a reading class, not teaching people how to read, but we'll be reading the book of Matthew. And then Terry and Brother David, eventually David Rogers, will be doing Tender Warrior. And guys, you need to be there. Ladies, push your guys to that class, because it'll make them more what you want your husband or your dad to be, or your brother to be in that case, or your boyfriend to be. It's a great class. I've taught it before, and Terry is a great teacher. He'll do well with it. But for tonight, we're on lesson number 12. We've seen 11. I hope we've got the right set of slides, Greg.
Did I put the wrong one in there?
The tabernacle
There
and
we
the
go.
priest. Let's see what's next. There we go. There's our tabernacle we've been talking about. Greg, why don't you lead us in a prayer as we get underway tonight?
Let's bow together. Our God and our Father in heaven, we come to you this evening. We're so thankful for this day. We're thankful for every day, Father, that you give us to go out and to be an example to others in the world about us. We pray that you will be with us as now we've come together to study a portion of your word and to later praise your name in song. We're so thankful for all that you do for us, and we're so thankful for Jesus, so thankful for your plan that through him we may have an opportunity to live with you forever. Be with us throughout this evening. May this study benefit us to the better of your kingdom. In Jesus'
And, well, we've talked about a number of things. We've talked about the importance of the tabernacle and the priest. We learned something very significant at the beginning of our class last Sunday morning, and that is that this Old Testament tabernacle system was what relative to the New? It was like a shadow. It was foreshadowing what was to come. The word copy is used, or type. And the point is, what you see in this Old Testament tabernacle system is foreshadowing what was to come under Jesus and the new covenant. We saw the different parts of the tabernacle. As you look at the photograph or the picture there, you see the curtains that surrounded the tabernacle court, the courtyard. You see inside that courtyard, the first item you see is the brazen altar. This is where the sacrifices were made. Then you have the laver. This is where the priest washed. And then you have the holy place. The holy place is the tabernacle proper. That is the tent, if you use that word. That is the tabernacle proper. And it was divided into how many parts? Two parts. The holy place and the most holy place. Most holy place is where the high priest went once a year and made atonement for the sins of the people. Now, we've got a lot to see about that as we go through. We said that this is foreshadowing what was to come under the New Testament. And when you look, Greg, in the book of Hebrews, you see Jesus entered the most holy place, not made with hands. This was made with hands. The most holy place, not made with hands, speaks of Jesus entering into heaven, offering his own blood as a sacrifice and atonement for sins. So all that's foreshadowed. There's much, much more to be said about that, and we'll cover that tonight and then come Sunday. If you look at the bottom of page 41 of your workbook, what is the tabernacle, or why the tabernacle? According to Exodus 29, why did God bring Israel out of Egypt? That I may what? That I may dwell among them. And the tabernacle is the place where God made his dwelling to be known. And then the last question on that page, question 5, according to Exodus 25:8, why did Israel need to build a sanctuary? Well, we just answered it. Yeah, it was in the sanctuary that God made his presence known as he dwelt among them. So, turning the page, Greg says we were on question number 6. In Exodus 25:22, what was the purpose of the mercy seat above the Ark of the Covenant? How did you answer that question? Someone on this side. How did you answer that question? Yes, Trudy? Yes, it is where God would meet with them. And so when you look at the order here, you see the tabernacle, the holy place, the most holy place, the mercy seat. That was what covered the Ark of the Covenant. And I'm not sure on the order of my pictures that I have here. Here's maybe what this might have looked like at night with remember the pillar of fire over that guided the people, but it would abide on the tabernacle as a visible demonstration of God's presence. And you see all the people encamped around it. All the 12 tribes had specific places where they were to camp around the tabernacle. Here's a representation of what the priests might have looked like. We'll come back to that a little bit later in our lesson tonight. Here's another representation of the tabernacle and the court and the various things that went along with that. Here is the ark and the mercy seat. And what did we say was contained in the Ark of the Covenant? You got Aaron's rod that budded, the Ten Commandments, the tablets of stone, and remember that pot of manna that they got in the wilderness? They were told to save a pot of that, and that was to be kept in the Ark of the Covenant. But this top part of the Ark of the Covenant, what we would call the lid, which involves this flat piece here, plus the cherubim that overshadowed it, that's called the mercy seat. That's where the high priest went once a year, and he sprinkled blood first for his own sins, and then made an atonement for the sins of the people. And a lot of interesting things to learn about the high priest and that Day of Atonement. He went in there once a year. No one else was allowed to go in there. And the question came up, well, what happens if he gets in there and has a heart attack? Who's going to go get him? No one. How did they solve that problem? They tied a rope on his leg. If he died in there, they'd pull him out by the rope, okay? That was I don't think that's in the scripture, but that was part of the Jewish practice to protect themselves from going into the most holy place, because they were not to go there. If you look at question 7, we're on page 42, question 7, toward the top of the page, how did the account of the golden calf in the middle of this exposition of the tabernacle, which we studied in our last lesson, how did that almost destroy the value of the tabernacle? Did anybody have trouble answering that question? You had trouble, Brother Walt?
2 people did.
Yeah, 3. Count me in, because I had trouble with it too. Remember, these were Edwin Crozier's questions, and Edwin sometimes is really weird on his questions. So I wasn't sure what he had in mind there. How did anyone answer? What did you answer, James? Okay, God could have destroyed the people. There wouldn't have been any people to bless. Chip? Or UB? Yeah. God would in some fashion actually stay at a distance from the people. In fact, he goes on to say something about that in chapter 33.
I was also just thinking of the irony of this tent, this meeting place here that's being built for God to dwell, and he reached a point where after the golden calf, he wasn't sure he wanted to be in their presence. And so this was almost for naught, if you will, in some ways, that God didn't want to be in their presence. And so that's kind of the way that I answered this question. And Max and I were talking about this Sunday. Neither of us called Edwin. A lot of times, especially going through the Genesis class, there were often times where I'd call Edwin and go, what were you thinking on this question? You had something in mind. And every once in a while he would go, I have no idea what I was thinking on that. But usually he would tell me, oh, this was what I was thinking about. But neither of us did contact him on this. But I really think that's really what it was about, that relationship that was almost altered, that this special place that was being made to communicate and be among the people to a degree was almost jeopardized, or was jeopardized really, by the golden calf.
Absolutely. Chip, did you have your hand up, sir? Okay. Was there another? Yes. Yes, Sister Peggy. Yeah, they did waste a lot, didn't they? Because Moses made them grind that thing up and mixed it in their water, and they wound up drinking the golden calf. Yeah, I guess no one got sick from that, but they wasted a lot, didn't they? Yeah, that's the point. Well, since you mentioned money, that's our next point.
Before we go there, Max, I was going to ask a question, and I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but we looked at a lot of those pictures on Sunday, and Max and I were talking a little bit after the class, and maybe some others, but as you look at this study, as we went through these pictures on Sunday, and I'm asking this today because I'm not going to be here Sunday, and I want to ask this question. Was there anything that you saw in that depiction of the temple, or anything that we've studied so far, that just made you, what stood out to you maybe as something you've seen that you never really recognized before? So it's just me. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. We were talking about that Sunday, that idea of carrying all that. I think, Max, was it 4 or 5 times that at least that we know of that they would have had to have disassembled and reassembled. And not just carrying all those boards was one thing. And maybe they could have used animals somehow for some of that. But certainly the Ark of the Covenant, there are a lot of items that they would have been required to carry. And, I'll tell you, that's a long journey carrying anything. But it just struck me, this was one of the pictures there that struck me. Max I think you said to me, Max, on Sunday that, just wonder, a lot of people might have just had this idea that this was just some big tent they threw up out there in the middle of the desert. But indeed it wasn't. It was very elaborate. It would have been extremely heavy, and it was very detailed to take apart and put back together.
These boards that you see, the 2 yellow boards that you see there, these made up the walls on 3 sides of the tabernacle, and of course part of the front side. So when you look at these boards here, these boards are 10 cubits. They're 10 cubits high, so that would be 15 feet. And I think they're 1.5 cubits this way, and I don't know the dimension the other way. But you take one of these, it's going to be almost 15 feet long, and 1.5 feet wide. So something like that.
27, a cubit and a half. So it would have been 27 inches wide. Right?
27. Yeah.
18 plus 9.
Yeah,
so.
that's right. It'd been 27. Been more than 2 feet wide each of these, and it's something that you and some other fellow could carry one of these, maybe, Greg. I don't know if you and I could do it or not. I'm probably too old.
Well, that's the thing. You think about how many. I was telling Max, you go and you buy David and I like to build some stuff occasionally. We build those tables and we put those 2x10 runners across the top, and those are kind of heavy to carry by yourself. And imagine would be about 3 of those, 3 2x10s, 16 foot long or 15 foot long. Imagine how heavy those would have been, and how many of them would it have taken? I mean, we could count that, but it would have been a pretty good number.
It would have been a good number. And then, Greg, across the back, this part back here, the wall was doubled back there. It was double thickness. That's what you see represented here. This is the side wall, which was single thickness, but the back part here was double thickness. And in addition to that, you have these bases, and then you had caps that go on the top of some of these. Then you've got these long holes that go through the sides. And so this was, I don't know how long it would have taken to disassemble this. I don't think it would take very long if you had enough manpower. You could disassemble this thing in a reasonably short period of time. Putting it back together, something like this, always takes longer than the disassembly.
Lots of hands. You pick. I think I saw Mary's hand up first, and then we'll go. Everybody will get. Yeah.
Now, the wood that was used, acacia wood, I don't know that it ever tells us where that came from, but wherever it came from, whether they carried this from Egypt, I don't know. I don't know that they would have known to have made provision for that. I don't know of a place where it tells about the source of the wood. It may be there somewhere, but I've not seen that, Mary Jane. I don't know.
Clarence and then Don. Yeah, oh, certainly it was doable. They had the people to do it, but it just the detail and all of the wood and the how it wasn't just wood, stacked up there. Just we cut down a tree and we got a bunch of odd shaped pieces together. It was decorative beyond just being, it was very detailed. Don. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think just in the detail that you see here, some of that's demonstrated by the two men that we'll talk about a little bit later and their ability to teach others. You're right. This wasn't just grunt work. They had skills. They had a skill set, and beyond that, God had given them the special ability to teach that skill set to other people. This took a skilled laborer in order to put this together.
Let me read a passage from Numbers chapter 4, and let me just start Numbers chapter 4. I'd like to read the whole chapter. I can't do that. But it talks here about how some of this stuff was moved. And it talks about how the ark was moved in verse number 5 and 6. It talks about the table of showbread being moved in verses 7 and 8. It talks about the lampstand. This is Numbers chapter 4, verse 9, the lampstand, the poles. Listen to this. I'm reading from verse 12. This is talking about some of not necessarily the big structure itself, but the utensils that were used inside. Remember, you had all these pans and pots and candlesticks, so on. I'm reading part of that, starting at verse number 12 of Numbers 4. It says, "Then they shall take all the utensils of service with which they minister in the sanctuary, put them in a blue cloth, cover them with a covering of badger skins, and put them on a carrying beam." And so all these utensils were to be covered and then were to be put on a carrying beam. And again, these are going to be carried by some of the men. But not just any men could do this. As you continue the reading in verse 13, it says, "Also they shall take away the ashes from the altar, spread a purple cloth over it. They shall put on it all the implements with which they minister, the fire pans, the forks, the shovels, the basins, and all the utensils of the altar, and they shall spread it on a covering of badger skins and insert its poles." This has to do with all the things that would have been used to offer the animal sacrifices. The next verse, verse 15, is critical. Numbers 4:15. "When Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, when the camp is set to go, then the sons of Kohath shall come to carry them, but they shall not touch any holy thing lest they die." these are the things in the tabernacle of meeting which the sons of Kohath are to carry. And so it was the Levites who disassembled everything, got it ready, and then it was the sons of Kohath who had the responsibility to pick it up and to carry it to its new location. So all of this was spelled out as far as, and there's so many technical points here. When you see all the fire pans, the forks, the other utensils that were used just in offering animal sacrifices, and then you had things that were used inside the tabernacle. The animal sacrifices, of course, were all done on the outside of the tabernacle, and then from time to time there was blood carried inside to make atonement. But basically all of that took place outside.
And look down at verse 32. It says, and the pillars around the court and their bases and pegs and cords with all of their equipment and all of their accessories. And you shall list by name the objects that they are required to carry. So it was very organized in how they would have disassembled and then put this thing back together.
These were the sons of Merari,
yes,
who were to carry this, and not just anyone could do it. If you notice in verse 30 of Numbers chapter 4, from 30 years old and above, even to 50 years old, these were the ones who would do that work. So if you were younger than 30, you didn't get to do it. If you were older than 50, you didn't get to do it.
One more year.
You got one more year, Greg. Okay. Well, yeah, so God was very specific on all this. Now, this is coming up next quarter. This is part of the book of Numbers. And so Greg will be teaching this. Greg and Brother Buckley will be teaching this upcoming. Well, let's look at the contribution. Okay, I got two more. Peggy, you're first. Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. These, some of these things, like the altar of incense, if I can back up to that, let me see if I can find that again. The altar of incense, everything there. Of course, you had the work around the top, which was engraving work, okay, around the top. But the rest of this was covered with what it calls beaten gold. And so the gold was beaten into thin sheets, and it was used then to cover. And that was the case with so many of these things. The Ark of the Covenant was that way. So many of these things were covered with gold. And a tremendous amount of gold went into this. And if you think this was a lot, remember that this was kind of a model for Solomon's temple that he built. And the temple, they doubled the dimensions. And so whereas, and let me see if I can go back to that earlier slide, when you see that this is 15 feet tall, 10 cubits, 15 feet tall, Solomon's dimensions, when he built the temple, he built the same ratio on the holy place, most holy place. The holy place, the outer part, is twice the size of the inner part, the most holy place, okay? And so this inner place here was a perfect cube. It would have been 10 cubits high, 10 cubits deep, and 10 cubits wide. And so it would have been 10 by 10 by 10 when it comes to cubits, 15 when we translate into feet. So it would have been 15 feet high, 15 feet wide, 15 feet deep. Now, when Solomon built the temple, if I'm correct in understanding, he doubled these dimensions. And so he would have gone from, it would have been from 15 feet high to 30 feet high. And when you double the dimensions, you do not double, you way more than double the size of your building. If you doubled all the dimensions of your walls and your floor and your ceiling, you double all those, what do you get? 9 times the size, something like that? Someone that's good at math can tell us, but it was much, much larger. And in Solomon's temple, you've got a building then, the most holy place is now, instead of 15 feet across, it's now 30 feet across. And they built new cherubims that went all the way across in that. So it was an elaborate thing. And the amount of gold that went into Solomon's temple was even much, much greater than the gold that was used here in the tabernacle. This served God's people, though, for almost 500 years, 450 years, till the time of Solomon. How about that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you had trouble hearing that, that acacia wood was common in that Sinai Peninsula, so would have fit well with them making this. Yeah. So we sidetracked a little bit, and I'm sorry I took us a little sidetrack, but it was just amazing to me as I looked at that detail and just thought about the fact of how it would be carried and how it would be moved and taken apart and put back together. And yet God would have had the expectation that when they took it apart and they put it back together, they put it back together exactly according to the pattern. They didn't have the freedom to just kind of change it up, make it easier, take some shortcuts. No, God said it had to be done a certain way, right down to, as we just read in Numbers, numbering the person who is going to take each piece and be responsible for each piece and naming each piece. Lots of detail there. Very, very interesting. But let's move on, if we can, to the contributions, because it took a lot of stuff, right, to make this happen. The first question there said, what did God ask from the Israelites? Where did all this come from? What do we learn there? The Egyptians had given it to them. That's where we know that it came from. Who was in possession of it? All of the children of Israel. And certainly, as Mary alluded to earlier, all of the details that God would have given them about the gold and the silver and the linens and all of the things that they needed, this they would have brought with them out of Egypt. And they got it from the Egyptians. Remember, what did we learn? As they left, God said what? They would do what to the Egyptians? They would plunder them. And so when you think about all the gold and silver and all of this that you read about that went into this, they carried it with them. And where did they get it? They got it from the Egyptians. And did they steal it? No. The Egyptians gave it to them. Get away from us was their thing. That's right. And so that's what happened. Everything that was laid out came out of Egypt by the providence of God, as this would have all been provided for them. Well, as you look at the Exodus 35, 21 to 29, there was a plea that was made, right, for the people to bring all of these goods that were needed. Who responded? Who responded to the plea? Everyone whose heart was stirred. What does that mean? Was God acting upon the hearts of these people in this case?
Not directly, but he was acting.
Okay.
You know, he just liberated them from slavery.
Yeah. But so I think it's one thing to look at this and to look and say, well, maybe God forced them to do this. All that were moved. And yet I don't think that's exactly it. I think the people were moved by what had happened to them. It sort of goes back to God acting upon Pharaoh's heart. We didn't dig deep into that, but Max and I both are of the belief that God did not force Pharaoh. When it said he acted upon Pharaoh's heart, he didn't force Pharaoh to do something. He knew the heart of Pharaoh. He knew how Pharaoh would react. And I think it was the same thing here. These people reacted and they gave freely. And it says, the idea of the free will offering, and I believe above what was already demanded them of their sacrifice.
And one of the things, they had not only been liberated from Egypt, but God had decided not to kill them over the golden calf thing.
Yeah.
And if you've been involved in that golden calf thing and said, oh, I repent, I'm sorry, God says, okay, I'm going to let you live. Okay, you might be more generous, I don't know. It says they gave out of a willing heart is what chapter 35 and verse 5 says. And that's, the best kind of giving is free will giving. Free will giving. The people of Israel, we learn in the law that they were bound by the tithe. That was like a 10% tax they had to give. And they didn't sit down each week and say, how much should we give? It was 10%. You owed it. It wasn't. It's like the IRS. The IRS. You don't sit down and say, how much should we donate to the IRS? You don't donate a nickel, my friend, and I don't either. We owe it. It's law, and the tithe was law. But the best kind of giving is giving from a willing heart. I want to give. I want to support God's work. And that's what these people wound up doing, Greg.
and the people were in possession of the items that were needed to build the tabernacle according to the pattern.
They were.
Right? God knew what they had taken out of Egypt. He knew what was going to be required. And so, I don't know how spread out all of these items were among the people, but the term everyone and all is used over and again. And it's interesting that here it probably took everyone and all who would have been in possession of these items to come and to participate in this giving so that they would have the items that they needed. Again, they didn't just collect, let's see what we have and see what we can make and how we can make this look the best. They needed certain things, and indeed they got them. And the next question, question 10, asks about how the people responded. And what would you say? How would you answer that question? They brought too much. They brought too much. It was beyond all that was needed in order to complete the task. And imagine that. They had to go and tell the people no more. Have we ever seen anything like that?
Yes.
Yes, we have.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
Yes.
I've heard someone say this, the only time in the history of God's people that the people ever gave too much. That just isn't true. I believe this, that God's faithful people are the most generous people on earth. Firmly believe that. And we have had special collections at various times and say, we need X number of dollars in order to meet a need. And we have never come up short. Never. We had a need 15 years ago for the Philippines. The need was massive. We had a need for the, what was the circumstance? The last one we did as a special collection. Trying to think what the circumstance was.
The last one was food. The food down in
food
Africa.
for Africa.
Yeah.
And by the way,
2 years ago.
the brethren, that's been 2 years ago, and the brethren gave enough and beyond, and that's coming.
We got double in that what we
we were hoping.
expected or hoped.
Yeah, we were
might
hoping to
believe.
get
It's
like
amazing.
we thought we needed like $14,000 immediately, and we got like 27,000. And brethren, that's coming up again. The situation in Zimbabwe, when you think it could not get worse, it has gotten much worse. And our brethren we have brethren over there right now who are in need, and our congregation is responding to them. But we're going to have to do a special contribution in a few weeks because that's what it's going to take. And I'm confident that God's people will come through again, and because God's people are the most generous people on earth. The reason that we're able to rebuild from the hurricane a year ago is because of the generosity of people across the country, the churches and individuals who sent funds to assist us. Once again, God's faithful people are the most generous people on earth. I firmly believe that.
That was just an amazing time, Max. I suspect you and I took as many calls as anyone from the congregation here, and it was just amazing, the number of calls. And I can't imagine how many calls you got, because as Donna can attest to, my phone, I was talking to 10 churches a day, or at least probably for the first week or 2 weeks. Literally, my phone was ringing, and I was talking to 10 churches a day. And I could not believe what was happening, to be honest. And it's just amazing. We see God's people respond. And that's the way this congregation has always responded, because that's what God wants of us. And I just think it's a wonderful thing. And I was just thinking, we give these children of Israel, it's easy to criticize them at times, isn't it, for the things that they've done. I mean, boy, they built a golden calf and they did all of these things. Oh, I'll tell you what, they weren't second place to anybody in what they gave, because the builders of the tabernacle had to come and tell Moses, stop. All this stuff they're bringing, I have to imagine, must have been getting in the way. They were bringing, we've got way too much. It would have created a different problem.
Greg, kind of like the water we had back here a year ago.
Yes.
You realize how many cases of water were brought here? And brethren from as far away as Tennessee and Florida loaded up their trucks. A flatbed from Indiana, 1,100 miles away, loaded up so much water, and we lined these back classroom walls with...
Did you tell any churches, please don't send us any more water?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
I mean,
we had to
we
say,
did because
no
it was
more,
just
no more
no more
water.
water.
And the water's all gone, though, now.
Yeah. It's just, again, it's just amazing. Verse 6, chapter 36, verse 6 says, the people had to be restrained from bringing more. Think about that. Just think about that. And I just think about, again, that spirit of giving. And it's not just a special collection, as we talk about perhaps for Africa or a few years ago, the flooding that happened over in Louisiana. And there's needs that come up, and it's not just that, but it's really about our giving on a weekly basis. We don't talk a lot about that. We really don't. And yet I think it's something we have to think about when the Bible tells us that we should be thinking about what we're giving. It's not just something we get to services and we pull out the wallet and, hey, if I've got a 20 today, maybe that's a good thing. And if I just got a 5, well, it's 5 this week. No, we think about it and we plan and we budget for what we're going to give. And so that we as a congregation can budget for what we are going to do in the community and throughout the world, because we want to make plans to go out and evangelize the world. Well, that takes funds. And so, it's the generosity of you and me and Max and all of us together. It's our generosity. We are in this together. This isn't a work of the elders or a work of the deacons or a work of a few. This is a work that we all do together. And I promise you that, if our contribution was double what it is today, we have a lot of requests that come our way that we have to say no to, that we might be able to preach the gospel in other places of the world. There are places to utilize that money to spend for the good of the gospel. And again, I'm not preaching about money, but I say we don't talk about that a lot. It's just the generosity that we see from these people. Don't let that be missed. Don't let that be missed. That's what God's people are. That's what we are as well. Yes, sir. Yeah. Don't store it up, right? Yeah, very good point. We got to be generous. We've got to give to God as well. Um, any other questions on the contribution section?
Well, let's go on to the workers then. That's our next section there on page 42. And question 11, which two main workers did God choose to construct the tabernacle according to Exodus 31, 1 to 6? You want to take a shot at their names,
Nobody
Jerry?
wants to have to pronounce that name.
Bezalel and Aholiab. Very good. Bezalel was related to this man Hur. Remember holding up the arms? Remember that of Moses, Aaron, and Hur? Hur was out of the tribe of Judah. And that name seems to be associated with the tribe of Judah.
He was a grandson, a great grandson of Joshua.
Okay.
Or no, of Caleb.
Yeah.
Caleb. Yeah, and we read about that in 1 Chronicles chapter 2.
And Aholiab was out of the tribe of Dan. And these men were evidently, well, look at question 12. How had God prepared these two men for this task? David? Evidently, it seems to me, as you read the text, David, that these men were given special talents by the Holy Spirit in order to carry out the work. I don't know how else to treat the text. And they not only did the work themselves, they taught others how to do the work too, Greg. So these men didn't do it all alone. And when you look at the intricacies, and let me see if we can pull up another picture or two of some of the things in the tabernacle. Here is the altar of incense, a representation of that. Almost all of these things had this intricate engraving work that was done around the top, as you see on this would have had. And not only that, but it's not just with the altar of incense, but all these things had these horns and had this, not lattice work, but this intricate engraving on the top. Look at question 13. According to Exodus 35:34, what ability had God specifically given to these two men, Bezalel and Aholiab? He gave them what? The ability to teach others. You know, these men probably could not have done all that work themselves, and so God gave them the ability to teach others.
And it's one thing to have the skill, and it's another thing to utilize the skill. So God had given them the skill, but also these guys had to apply the skills that they had been given. And a good example, I believe, of just applying a talent that God has given you to work.
And as you look at the top of page 43, our next question is 14. Who else had God called to work on the tabernacle as seen in Exodus 36? There's a couple of words you might pick out there. Craftsmen, what was the other word? Artisans, yeah, artisans and craftsmen. I don't know that I really understand all the distinction that might have been there, but I think in terms of the craftsman as being the man who might be able to work the wood and prep that, whereas the artisan would be the man maybe who would do the intricate engraving work, the like of that. You know, you can cut a board and nail things together, Greg. That doesn't mean you can do intricate engraving. So the idea of crafts, these were skilled men. And the thing that's important here is that those who had to give, they gave great amounts. Those who were able to work, they did their part. And whatever skills they had, they put it to God's purposes. And that's the way the church should be today. Every one of us has something that we can offer. And some have skills that others don't have. But whatever we have, we need to use for God's glory. You know what would be a shameful thing is for us to come to the end of our lives, Greg, and look back and say, you know, all the goods I had, the money I had, the house I had, whatever skills I had, I never put them to use for God's purposes. That would be sad, wouldn't it? So we need to use what we have to give God the glory. David? Yeah. Well, that's right. The skills of these people, you still see examples of it in artifacts that are discovered today. Well, we're just about out of time. Greg, you're going to be out of town Sunday? You're going to see your grandbaby?
I am. I hope.
Okay, well, that'll be great. I'll teach the class by myself. Let me say it's been a pleasure to be with you for this quarter. I think we've had a little bit of fun. We've enjoyed all these people, and we've enjoyed studying and teaching with one another. Again, the new classes are starting just a week from Sunday. Please get signed up so we will be sure we have the correct number of books for each class. Sunday, I do want to talk in some detail about the high priest, and you see the various things. Remember, he wore a turban. He has this breastplate which has the jewels on it, one jewel for each of the tribes of Israel. He also has a linen garment that he wears. Then he wears a tunic over the linen garment. He has tassels on the bottom of his garment. I think the tassels, didn't the bottom of it have little bells on it? And that way, when he's inside the most holy place and there's no more bells ringing,
You know, to pull the rope.
it's time to pull the rope. Yeah. Okay.
It's time to pull the rope now. Kids are coming down the
Okay,
hall.
kids are coming. Thank you all. God bless you. We'll see you Sunday. We'll wrap it up.